He didn't break a law, he didn't betray anyone. All he did was take his wife's last name, and suddenly, the world turned on him. The story starts simple. His name was Michael Turner, a man raised to believe strength meant standing tall, being in control, never bending. When he married Elena Rivera, he did something unexpected. He chose to become Michael Rivera. To him, it wasn't a statement of rebellion. It was love, equality, a way of honoring the woman who had once saved him from his own loneliness. But to others, it was betrayal. Friends joked that he'd lost his masculinity. Family whispered that Elena must be manipulating him. Even strangers online, people who knew nothing about his life, mocked him, calling him weak, controlled, emasculated. It's strange, isn't it? A man can abandon his family and still be called a man. But if he shows humility, love, or respect, suddenly his strength is questioned. Michael didn't anticipate how heavy the judgment would feel. At work, colleagues teased him every time someone said, "Mr. Rivera." At dinner with his parents, his father couldn't hide the disgust. "You gave up your name for a woman?" he said, his voice sharp, as if Michael had broken an ancient code of manhood. The judgment didn't stop, it evolved. At first it was jokes, harmless, they said. Then came the smirks, the patronizing comments, the subtle digs that lingered longer than laughter. Men would clap him on the back and say, "So she's the boss now, huh?" They thought they were being funny, but every word carried a seed of contempt, the kind that tries to shrink a man until he doubts himself. Michael learned something powerful in that silence. Men don't just compete for status, they compete for identity. They're trained to believe their worth is built on dominance, independence, and control, and any man who steps outside that mold threatens the illusion that's been sold to them since childhood. The truth? Most men aren't cruel. They're scared. Scared of being judged, scared of being laughed at, scared of feeling less than. That's why they mock what they secretly envy. Freedom. The freedom to choose without needing validation. The freedom to define masculinity on your own terms. Weeks turned into months, and Michael noticed how people treated him differently now. It wasn't just mockery anymore, it was distance. The men who used to invite him out for beers stopped calling at work. He wasn't one of the guys anymore. He'd become something else, a symbol of what happens when a man refuses to play by the script. But here's what most people missed. Michael wasn't angry. He was observing. He was watching how fragile modern masculinity really is, how it's held together by fear, approval, and performance. Because when a man acts outside of those boundaries, others panic. Why? Because it reminds them how much of their own power depends on pretending. One night, she asked softly, "Do you wish you hadn't done it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I just wish more men understood that love doesn't erase you. It expands you." Those words stayed with her. Because in that single line, Michael revealed what most people never realize, that true masculinity isn't about control, it's about security. The kind of security that doesn't need to prove anything. The world doesn't forgive men who choose peace over pride, and Michael learned that the hard way. When his father stopped calling, he told himself it was temporary. When old friends stopped inviting him to gatherings, he told himself they were just busy. But deep down, he knew the truth. People weren't uncomfortable with his decision. They were uncomfortable with what it revealed about them, because when one man steps out of the pattern, he shines a light on everyone still trapped inside it. At a family dinner months later, that tension finally boiled over. His brother leaned back in his chair and said with a smirk, "So, Mr. Rivera, how does it feel giving up your identity for a woman?" Laughter rippled around the table. Even his father chuckled, low and bitter. But Michael didn't flinch. He looked at them, calm and steady. And then he asked something that froze the room. "Why do you think my name defines me more than my actions do?" Silence. He continued, "My name didn't make me a man. My choices did, my integrity did, my ability to love without fear did. And if you think changing a few letters on paper erases that, maybe you never understood manhood in the first place." No one spoke after that. Even his father looked away. That moment wasn't loud. It was liberating, because Michael finally understood that he didn't need to convince anyone anymore. He had stopped fighting to prove what only he could know, that he wasn't less of a man for honoring his wife. He was more of one for doing it without apology. That night, Eleanor held his hand as they walked home under the streetlights, because in that single line, Michael revealed what most people never realize, that true masculinity isn't about control, it's about security, the kind of security that doesn't need to prove anything. A few months later, life gave Michael an unexpected test. He and Elena attended a business event, one of those elegant, polite gatherings filled with small talk, shallow smiles, and subtle judgment. As they introduced themselves to a group of executives, one of the men extended his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Turner." Michael smiled and replied calmly, "It's Rivera now." The man blinked, confused. "Oh, you took her name?" There it was again, the disbelief, the condescension, a tone that tried to shrink something he was proud of. But this time, Michael didn't explain. He didn't try to justify. He simply said, "Yes, I did. It's the name that represents the family we're building together." Then he turned his attention to Elena and continued the conversation like nothing happened. It was subtle, but powerful, a quiet refusal to let someone else define his story. Later that night, a few women at the event approached Elena. One of them said softly, "I wish my husband would be that secure. You're lucky." Eleanor smiled, but inside she wasn't thinking about luck. She was thinking about choice, the choice to be with a man who led not through dominance, but through understanding. That night, as they drove home, the city lights flickering across the windshield, Michael said, "You know what's funny? The same people who laugh at me for taking your name still live for other people's approval." Elena turned to him and said, "That's the difference. You live for truth. And that truth, that men can redefine strength, is exactly what made him different. Because real strength isn't found in rejection of the feminine." Years later, when Michael looked back, he realized that moment, the decision to take Elena's last name, had become more than just a gesture. It was a mirror reflecting who he truly was. Every time he signed Michael Rivera, he wasn't just writing her name, he was writing their story, one built on respect, courage, and emotional intelligence. The traits society rarely celebrates in men, but secretly admires when it sees them. And here's what most people will never understand. It wasn't about giving something up. It was about breaking free from the invisible cage of expectation that tells men what they should be instead of what they can be. Because here's the truth, few dare to say out loud, masculinity isn't fragile. Ego is. The man who hides behind dominance fears loss. The man who embraces vulnerability fears nothing. Michael wasn't weaker for standing beside his wife as an equal. He was freer. He didn't take her last name because he needed her identity. He did it because he already knew his. He understood something that most men never learn. When love is pure, it doesn't ask you to prove your power, it asks you to share it. And that's why this story matters. Because it's not about names or signatures or tradition. It's about evolution. The kind of evolution that happens when a man stops fighting his heart and starts leading with it. So, let me ask you this, and answer honestly in the comments. If you loved someone deeply, would you be strong enough to challenge the world's idea of what a real man should do? Because maybe, just maybe, the men who are brave enough to love without fear, to choose respect over reputation and peace over pride, are the ones who'll build a future worth living in. If this story made you think, or made you feel something, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more psychology-driven stories that reveal the truths most people avoid, and share this video with a friend who needs to hear that being a real man isn't about dominance, it's about depth.